Hey, Caroline.
Hello, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing well.
I see everyone trickling in. Hey guys, if you are just joining, we're expecting a good amount of folks for today. So we're just gonna give everyone a minute or so to trickle in. So hang tight while we wait for everyone. But Caroline, I see you're in your apartment. Have you been outside yet today?
I haven't yet, but it is so beautiful outside. I can't wait to go for a morning walk around the block.
I know. I feel like you have to go in the morning though, because I don't know if anyone in the attendees, we obviously can't hear you guys, but I don't know if anyone's in the New York area, but it's supposed to be like 100 degrees today. So better get outside before it gets too gross out.
Yeah, definitely a scorcher. Yeah, but enjoying the last couple of summer days. I feel like summer's gone by so fast.
Yeah. Someone put it's soupy in New York. Exactly.
Yeah.
It is something out there. Awesome. And it looks like we have a good amount of folks on. I know we're expecting a few more, but I know we promised you guys a quick webinar today, so we don't want to take up too much time while we wait for everyone. We'll just get started with some backstory and some intros before diving into the fun stuff. So hey everyone, thank you for joining. This webinar is really going to be focused on keyboard shortcuts, ways to work efficiently in the studio. Many of you have probably met with Caroline and I on previous trainings or webinars. We run a lot of our customer and Ceros user trainings. And we were chatting recently and we realized a lot of times on these trainings, we'll mention different shortcuts and things that we use all the time. And we always hear people say like, oh, I wish I knew that, or my job could have been done so much faster if I knew that shortcut. So we figured why not put together a short little session on our favorite shortcuts, how we work efficiently in the studio, you know, coming from people who are in there all the time. So with that, a little bit more intro on us. My name is Caroline Boyland. I am the digital content manager on the Educate team. Been with Ceros for about 3.5 years now. So I've probably met with you guys on past trainings and things. If not, nice to meet you guys and thank you for joining.
And I'm Caroline Brestowitz. I'm a digital designer on the Educate team. Nice to see everyone again working on these. Very excited to be showing everyone our favorite tips and tricks today. Perfect. So to get started, we're going to start off on going over keyboard shortcuts. Before we dive into our favorite ones, I did want to mention we do have an extensive list of these keyboard shortcuts that you can find under the Help tab. And we have a lot of different categories, so feel free in the studio to check these out so you can see the whole list here. And with keyboard shortcuts, they're great because they really just save time as you're going. I mean, you can do everything in the studio with clicks and moving your mouse, but by incorporating keyboard shortcuts into your workflow, it really just saves that little bit of time doing those extra clicks, and it just, all of those extra clicks can add up in time. So if you're eliminating those with the keyboard shortcuts, it's just going to help with your workflow.
And Caroline, one other thing I just want to add before we dive in, as a reminder, guys, we're going to send out this deck and the recording of this session by the end of the week. So don't feel like you have to take too many notes or memorize anything we're going to go through. You have access to all of this later on. So just wanted to point that out before we dive in.
Yeah, it's a great point. Perfect. So why don't we go over a couple of these keyboard shortcuts? And I did want to mention within the keyboard shortcuts list that I just went over, you'll see all the relevant keys if you're coming from a Mac or PC. So for this particular deck, we've put out the keyboard shortcuts for the Mac version, but we'll also be mentioning the Windows and PC. So don't worry, you can see all of those in the list there. All right, so some of our favorite keyboard shortcuts, we're just going to go through them by category. So first off, you can, instead of scrolling through your canvas, you can just hold down the space bar, and that's a really quick, easy way to pan quickly and efficiently throughout your canvas there. Also wanted to mention that if you select a layer in the layers panel and then press the space bar, that's going to just drill you exactly to where that layer is sitting on the canvas. This is super helpful, especially when you're working with a really long scrolling piece like this. Sometimes you might not know exactly where that layer is on the canvas. You see it in the layers panel, but you're not sure where it is. Feel free to just select it in the layers panel, hit that space bar, and then you're really directed exactly to where it is on the canvas. We also have the zoom in and zoom out keyboard shortcuts. That's just pressing Command or Control C and V. I'm constantly just taking a different perspective of the canvas as I'm working in there. So again, this is really helpful just so you can quickly zoom in and out instead of having to click that little drop down to zoom in and out manually. Along the same lines, just to save a little bit of time, there are times where you really need to take a step back and see your entire canvas. Maybe you need to add a section here or there. So instead of just hitting the command minus key to zoom out a couple of times, you can just hold Shift Command 0, and that's just really going to fit the entire canvas in the view. Again, that's just going to save a little bit of time there, but it can come in really handy. Next, for selections, this is one of my personal favorites. So there are times where you can lock layers on the canvas. This just ensures you don't accidentally move it as you're working in Studio. But if you do have locked layers, sometimes if you go to try to edit it, you can't actually click it in the canvas because it's locked. And again, if you're working in a long scrolling piece, maybe you have a ton of different layers, you could have folders where things are kind of nestled. You might not be able to find where that locked layer is very quickly. But if you use the keyboard shortcut of just holding down the L key and selecting the layer on the canvas, that's just going to highlight that locked layer in the layers panel. So then from there, you can quickly just unlock it, make any changes or adjustments, and then relock it, and you're good to go. So this has come in so handy so many times as I've worked in the studio. So definitely encourage you to remember this one. All right, and then also looking at selections, you can always select multiple assets at once. So you can hold the Shift key down and then select the layers on both the canvas and the layers panel. So that's just helpful if you, instead of want to just select a whole batch of things in a vicinity, you can just select them individually. And within the layers panel, if you hold also the command key, that'll highlight a selection of them. Again, they don't have to all be in a row. And then finally, we have selecting within a group. If you need to select an asset within a group, you can always like double click just to drill into that group to then select an asset. But especially if you have things nestled within a couple of groups, that can just take a little bit of time. So keyboard shortcut for that is if you hold down the command key and then select the asset on the canvas, that'll select just that asset within the group. You can see in the layers panel there. So that can really help with efficiency. And again, just save you a little bit of time, but that time really adds up in the long run.
Yeah, and Caroline, if I can jump in on this one, just wanted to point out for all the folks on the line that might be designing accessible content or designing with accessibility in mind. One thing when designing with the Ceros accessibility features is you do need to organize your layers panel using groups instead of folders. And I know it can be a little bit of a difficult transition if you're used to working with folders in your layers panel and now you have all of your sections grouped together. So this has been one that's been instrumental in just, getting the hang of working with groups and being able to quickly click on different layers within those groups. Because I know personally, I usually design with folders and have been trying to use groups more. And this one I use constantly when I'm trying to click on the different assets within that. So definitely a really helpful one there.
Yeah, that's a great point there.
Cool, and I can touch on some of these transformation ones as well. So you'll see here in this little screen recording, we are scaling up these different assets together, and it's resizing the text as we scale those up. So if you hold down Command and Shift while you scale up different assets, it'll resize the text with those proportionally. This can just be a really helpful time saver because in this example in particular, in that screen recording, you'll see and you would essentially have to scale up those background squares and then go into each of those text boxes individually and scale up the text size there. And you have a couple different text sizes in there. So it's not like you could just grab all of those and quickly, change the actual font size. So using that shortcut, holding down Command and Shift while you scale to scale your text proportionally is a good time saver too. Another one of my favorites, scaling from center. So if you hold down Option while you scale an object, it's going to scale that and keep that center point instead of scaling it kind of out to the side. And if you hold down Option and Shift while you scale it, it'll also scale that and keep the proportions locked in. This one is really, really helpful if you're working with object states. So if you've used object states, it's a way to transform different objects. You can create like hover states and different things like that. And you might want to change the size of a shape or an image on hover. And it's nice to make sure you're locking in that same center point when you're scaling up an object for the hover state to make sure that it doesn't kind of jump to a different location or anything like that when you do hover over it. It'll stay in that same center point and scale proportionally. And then a couple more. We love working with guides. They can be super helpful. You can draw out guides on your canvas just by dragging those from the rulers on the top or the left-hand side. But sometimes if you have a lot of guides on the canvas, it can be a little bit overwhelming or hard to see the actual assets on the canvas if it's just covered in a ton of those purple lines. So what we like to do is use the semicolon key to toggle the visibility of those guides on and off. So if you don't want to see those anymore, you want to be able to see your canvas a little bit more clearly, you can quickly toggle those guides off with the semicolon key and then toggle them back on as needed. So that's just a good one if you're feeling overwhelmed by the amount of those, or it's hard to see the canvas or anything like that. And the next one, distance guides from selection. So this one is really, really helpful when aligning your assets. So you'll see in the screen recording here, if you select an asset and then you move around your pointer while holding down Option or Alt if you're on Windows, it'll actually tell you exactly how many pixels away that asset is from the other assets on the canvas. So just holding down Option or Alt while you're having an asset selected and then moving around your cursor, it just helps with aligning those assets, making sure everything is pixel perfect without having to try to like count how many pixels away you're moving things or anything like that. So no math required, just quickly telling you those numbers there. And I do see a couple questions coming in through the chat. Just know we're going to save some time at the end for those. Just want to make sure we get through this core info and then we'll jump back to all the questions. So keep feeling free to send those in and we'll make sure to save time at the end.
Perfect. So next, let's go over copying assets. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can make a copy of an asset within the studio. So just really wanted to break these down in different instances where you may use one over the other. So first off, you can use keyboard shortcuts. We can copy and paste. That's Command or Control C and V to copy and paste. Now, when you use the keyboard shortcuts to copy and paste, the assets will paste in place. And then you can hold Shift and just move them over if you want to keep that level, the same proportion there. I also wanted to mention, and you can see in this recording here, that if you copy an asset and then select a layer and then paste, that asset will paste within that layer there. So that can just help you. So you don't have to realign and move where the layer is. If you don't have anything selected, it'll paste at the top of the layers panel. So just remember, any layer that's higher up in the layers panel will be in front of the other layers on the canvas. So in some instances, you would want the asset to copy at the top of the layers panel. In others, especially with a long scrolling piece like this, you would want it to just paste within a folder. Since you already have things structured and organized, that just saves you that extra step of having to manually pull that copied asset into another folder. We can also make a duplicate of an asset just by holding or selecting the asset first, I should say, and then holding Option or Alt key and dragging to make a copy. This just saves you that extra step of, pasting it and then moving it. You can just select it, hold the Option key and drag it. That's something that I'm constantly using in the studio. It just makes it really efficient to make a quick copy. And then once you make a copy of your asset like this, since you have everything already structured, you have your animations, maybe interactions applied, you can then easily really just double click in there, make any changes or adjustments, but it's really convenient just to make a copy like that. Another way that you can copy assets is with the right click menu. So if you just right click, the very top, you have the option to copy and then paste here. So this is really helpful if you want to paste assets in a different location on the canvas. But you can also use this for copying assets from one experience to another. That becomes very handy because the experiences may be a different size. So like the canvas may be a different size. So if you just right click and hit paste here, that asset will paste wherever your mouse is where you've clicked it. So that can also save time. You don't have to figure out the orientation of where it pasted if you had used the keyboard shortcuts trying to relocate it. So copy and paste here is a great one. And since we're talking about the right click menu, also wanted to highlight that you have the option to copy and paste animations. from one asset to another. So feel free to select an asset, right click, you can select copy animations, and then choosing another asset, you can always right click, paste animations, and that's a really wonderful way to keep your animations consistent throughout an experience. And it just saves you time. You don't have to memorize exactly what the delay, the duration was, what the effect was. You can just easily copy and paste it. And don't forget, you can also copy and paste animations, again, from one asset in a different experience to one that you're working on in the studio. So again, if you see something maybe in a template where you really like the animation, you're not sure what's applied, feel free to copy the animation, and then you can paste into your own asset on your canvas.
Yeah, I love that copy paste animations. I use that at least twice a day.
Yep, same.
Awesome. So a couple other tips and tricks before we move into Q&A. If you have not used the remove background tool, it's amazing, especially for someone like myself. I don't really come from the design side of things. So for me, the idea of jumping into Photoshop or Illustrator to cut out the background of an image, something like that, feels a little daunting, a little bit time consuming. So this tool in the studio lets you right click on an image and select remove background from that right click menu. And that actually uses AI on the back end to auto detect the background of that image, and it'll chop that out for you, just leaving transparency there. So a massive time saver. I will say it's using AI, so your background does need to have a clear-cut foreground and background in order to detect that. But if you are going to need a transparent background, definitely recommend at least testing that out, seeing if you can use that before moving over to a design tool to make that change. And that being said, just know you can also copy and paste from design tools. So if that doesn't work and you do jump over to Photoshop, Illustrator, wherever it is to edit an image or anything like that, you can just copy and paste the edited one right back into the studio. So that's helpful too. Replace image. This is another one of my favorites, especially when working with templates, either the Ceros templates or templates that your team has created. This is just the ability to either right click on the image or in your design tab, select replace image there, and that'll pull up your desktop, and then you can choose any image you have and swap it in for the one that's on the canvas. The really cool thing with this is it carries over anything and everything that was applied to the original image. So if the original image had animations or object states or interactions, maybe it's a part of a carousel, maybe you've played around with the brightness or the saturation in those image editing tools, anything that you did to that original image carries over to the one you swapped in. So you don't have to reapply any of that. It'll keep all of that same formatting and keep it in the same, interactive component. Maybe it's within a pop-up or within a carousel, whatever it is. All of that carries over. It stays in the same spot on the canvas. It goes into the same spot on your layers panel. So it's just a massive time saver rather than dragging in a new asset, from your desktop, having that go to the top of your layers, having to reorganize that and reapply any settings. So definitely leverage that replace image feature. I know I feel like I've said this about a couple so far, but this one's actually my favorite, the canvas adjustment tool. This lets you add or remove space anywhere you need on the canvas. So typically, if you were going to add space to the canvas, you would add that to the overall page height, and it would add essentially like blank space at the bottom of the page. And then you'd have to kind of manually drag everything down, to make room in the middle or the top, wherever. This tool lets you say, from point A to point B, you want to add in canvas. It'll add in that space anywhere. So whether it's at the top, in the center, even at the bottom, it'll add that space in, proportionally shift down anything below it, including any locked or hidden layers. So think of content that's hidden for pop-ups or within carousels or anything that's locked down. Those will all still move as well. So it's just a nice time saver rather than having to unlock layers or turn on the visibility of layers and then have to kind of drag everything. This just lets you add in space wherever. It also works in the reverse, so it lets you remove the canvas if you've added too much. This one is exceptionally helpful on mobile. Typically for mobile, you're going to be restacking your design in a more vertical format, and chances are you're going to need a little bit more canvas height. So I always use this first when creating a mobile layout. I just add in a bunch of space really anywhere I kind of need. And then I start restacking things, and then you can always use it to remove extra space at the end. So that one is super helpful. And then we have a couple of our favorite tips with the layers panel. The first thing, less of a tip and more of just a pointer here. If you accidentally close or you collapse your layers panel, just know that tool all the way on the right of your toolbar helps you turn that back on. A lot of times people will lose that and not know where to find it. So if you close your layers panel, just know it's that button all the way at the right of your toolbar. And then the next one for editing text. So to edit text on the canvas, typically you could just click or double click into a text box and then start editing that text right away. However, if that text is hidden behind another layer or it's grouped together with something, whatever it is, if it's hard to click on, there is a helpful shortcut here to enable you to jump right into that text box. So you'll see here in this example, this text in our template says tab 1, and that's covered by a hotspot. So you can't double click through that hotspot to edit that text. So instead of having to move the hotspot and then click on the text and then move the hotspot back, you can actually just find that text layer in your layers panel and click on that little T next to the layer. That'll jump you right into the text box and you can just start editing it right from there. So you don't have to actually click into the text box. You can just click on that T and edit as you go. So that's another helpful one when working with templates as well. If layers are locked or they're covered up by other things, I like to just use that little trick to jump into those text boxes.
Yeah, and another note with that is when you click on the T and the cursor comes in at the beginning of the text box, instead of having to like delete everything, maybe it's like a paragraph or something you're adjusting, you can also do Command or Control A, and that's going to select all of the text in that text box, and then you can just start typing whatever you want to change. So that's another helpful tip when you are using this clicking the T in the layers panel to adjust that text.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. So I know we got a couple questions. So let's take some time to look at those and feel free to keep sending those in. I know we had a couple questions about Mac versus PC. I know we were mentioning a lot of the Mac shortcuts. In our guide that we're going to send out, we'll include the PC ones. So, you know, Command is Control or Option would be Alt. Also, just know in your studio, when you go to the Help menu and click on keyboard shortcuts, it'll actually detect whatever device type you're coming from, and it'll show you Mac or Windows shortcuts based on your device. So just know when you're in the studio and you look at those shortcuts, it's always going to show you the right ones for whatever device you're on. Just to see a couple of those. Someone said the shortcut to see the distance between two objects is not working for you. Any ideas? That's a great question. I'm not sure why that wouldn't be working without seeing the experience that you're working on. It should be if you hold down and select an object and then hold down Option or Alt and then pan around with your mouse. It should show you the distance guides between those. Not sure why that's not working, but we can definitely follow up with you after to take a look at the specific project you're working on and see maybe it's grouped with something else or something like that, and you're not able to see the exact distance. So we'll check on that for you. Yeah, of course.
There was a question here too. It says, why can't I copy and paste interactions? So right now you're only able to copy and paste animations from one asset to another. But what you could do is, you know, have hotspots, have the interactions that you want to apply to that, make a copy of that hotspot, and then you can just adjust the interactions applied or whatever that interaction is targeting. So that's a quick way and an efficient way, so you're not constantly, you know, adding them individually. So that's one tip there.
Definitely. A question that came up is sometimes when I use Option and drag to copy an object, it's not going into the place that you want it to. Is there a way to avoid that? I'm not sure if there's a way to avoid it not pasting in the exact spot that you'd want. What I would recommend doing is then just doing the Command or Control C to copy and then doing the right click paste here. And then that'll paste that in the exact location that you want. So that's probably the route I would take there instead of using the Option and drag.
Also with if as you're moving assets, if you just hold down the Shift key, that should keep the proportion and alignment of the assets. So you could try that as well, but also everything that Caroline just said, going that route too. So you can see there are a lot of different ways to achieve the same thing in the studio. You know, there's no right way to do it. You can kind of try these different options.
Definitely. Can we set up custom shortcuts? Unfortunately, no. Right now, it's just the shortcuts in the studio. Is there a shortcut to format text for like Command B to bold? As of right now, there is no shortcuts for editing the text in the studio, mostly because with the fonts that you bring in, all the fonts that you bring in might have different families associated with them. So you might bring in a font that doesn't have a bold formatting or an italics formatting. So there's no way to mass kind of shortcut edit text like that. Just looking through the rest of these. Are there plans to implement control scroll to zoom in and out instead of control minus and plus? I do not believe we have any plans to implement that, but we can always double check with our product team and see if that's on the roadmap for the future. When using the same template for different brands, how do you quickly update colors and fonts used throughout the studio? Is the only option to go component by component? Yeah, there isn't really a way to mass apply formatting to the entire experience, but you can do the trick Caroline was saying earlier where you hold down Command or Shift and select a lot of different assets. So if you're going to be changing the color of all of your CTA buttons, instead of doing that, to every single one, you can either hold down Command and Shift and then select them all and then apply those formatting changes. You can also create what are called synced objects. So CTAs and menu bars are really the two main use cases that come to mind for me when thinking about synced objects. But basically, if you create a synced object, so say you have a CTA button that's a red square shape and white text over it, and then you turn that to a synced object, which is an option at the bottom of your layers panel. Then if you use that CTA throughout the rest of your design, so say you have it on each page or you have a menu on each page, whatever it is, anywhere you've copy and pasted that synced object, if you make edits to one, those changes will carry over to any other pasted version of that synced object. So if you do know you're going to need to be making changes, mass applying them to every CTA or every menu across each different page or anything like that, that you want to stay consistent, you can turn it into a synced object, copy it, paste it throughout, and then anytime you need to make changes, it'll carry over to all of those.
There's also a question that says, can you cut, crop, mask multiple file types? So if this is asking about adjusting them at like all multiple the same time, what you can do is add, let's say if you want to crop an image so that they're all consistent, maybe for a carousel, for example, you could add guides to kind of mark out exactly the size of the images that you want. And then if you just double click on an image, then you can crop it and you have those guides there to really mark out exactly the size and placement where you'd like it. So that's one great way to make sure all of your assets are the same size within a carousel like that, for example.
Definitely. Someone had also asked, I might have missed this, where can I see this presentation again? We're going to be sending out the recording of this and the presentation deck, so you guys can refer back to any of this. Additionally, like we mentioned, all those shortcuts are in the help menu in the studio, so you can reference them there as well. And we'll also be posting this on Ceros Educate under our on-demand webinar. So if you want to send it to anyone else on your team to watch moving forward, you'll be able to find it there as well. I believe we have a couple other questions, and I know we're trying to wrap up by 11:30, so we can just make sure we get these answered. Is there a format painter tool? There is not. Closest thing to that, again, would be either syncing objects together and then mass applying your edits, or just selecting multiple at the same time and applying those edits to them as a whole. So there is no format painting. And then someone else who said they are struggling with the replace image feature. And is this a glitch? I'm not sure without looking at the situation in particular. What you can do is maybe send us the image that you're trying to replace it with. And maybe it's something with the file type. You should be able to replace images with JPEGs, PNGs, and SVGs. And then you can also use the replace image feature for videos as well. But you can only replace videos with videos and images with images. So not sure why that's not working for you currently, but we can always take a look at your piece and follow up to see why that might be happening.
And I know in the presentation, we demoed the replace image tool, but with the replace video tool, it works the same way. So if you had any settings applied to the original video and then you replace that video, those settings will carry over to the new video that replaces it. So I just wanted to call that out too.
Definitely. And it looks like one last question in the chat before we wrap up. Someone mentioned with accessibility, on some occasions, it's been recommended to outline text, but screen readers won't read that and you have to alt tag. When do you recommend doing this and when not? So for accessibility, we recommend only using the live text tool in the studio so that screen readers can read that out. And then any images in the studio, you'll want to add alt tags to. So for your text content, we always just recommend using the live text tool, and then that'll be readable by screen readers. Let me just double check. Okay, perfect. Someone said this was really helpful. Glad that you thought so. Thank you so much for joining. And I think that's all the questions, unless Caroline, was there anything else on your end that you wanted to point out?
No, I think that wraps it up. Of course, we do have other keyboard shortcuts and things. So again, just take a look in the keyboard shortcuts menu in the studio if you want to check out other ones. These are just our favorite and personal ones that we constantly use. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining today.
Yeah, thanks so much everyone for joining. And if you're in one of the areas like we are, where it is sweltering hot outside, I hope you stay cool. Hope you guys learned something today, and we'll talk to you all soon. Bye, Caroline.
Bye.